History is often taught as a clean line, a progression of kings, wars, empires, and revolutions. But beneath the familiar headlines of textbooks and monuments lies another world, a forgotten layer of time that doesn't quite fit the official narrative. These are the events that slipped through the cracks, lost moments, strange episodes, and unsettling truths that history quietly buried. Some were suppressed, others simply overlooked. Yet all of them whisper something deeper about who we are and what we've chosen to remember or forget. Tonight, we'll journey into those buried layers of time. You won't need to memorize dates or names. You only need to listen. Let each paradox draw you deeper into the shadows of history, where forgotten echoes still speak and unanswered questions remain. Get comfortable. Let your thoughts drift. This isn't the history you learned in school. This is the history you were never meant to know. There was once a city, grand, influential, bustling with trade and life, that was so real it appeared on maps for over a century. Its name was Veneta, and it stood somewhere along the southern coast of the Baltic Sea. Chronicled by medieval sailors, described in old manuscripts, and whispered about by generations of European traders, Veneta was often called the Atlantis of the North. But here's the paradox. While it was once marked clearly on maps, no one can find any trace of it today. According to 11th century chronicles, Veneta was a metropolis unlike any other in Northern Europe. It was said to be a multicultural hub, where Slavic, Norse, and Arabic merchants met in a thriving marketplace. It had towering walls, intricate temples, and an advanced urban layout. Some claimed its architecture rivaled Rome or Constantinople. And yet, it's vanished. Archaeologists have searched the modern coastlines of Germany and Poland, where Veneta supposedly stood. Sonar scans have been conducted. Excavations have been launched. Yet no ruins have ever been conclusively tied to this city. Some historians argue it was a myth, a medieval exaggeration based on real ports like Wolin or Kołobrzeg. Others believe it existed but was swallowed by the sea, perhaps due to a storm surge or tectonic shift. And some speculate it was erased intentionally, its memory suppressed by those who conquered it. But here's where the paradox deepens. Veneta wasn't forgotten gradually. It was removed. By the late 18th century, maps that had once included it began to omit the city entirely, almost as if a decision had been made. This place no longer exists, not just in the physical world, but in the collective story of civilization. What kind of city can exist in recorded history, in chronicles, in cartography, and then vanish so completely that its ruins are not only lost, but denied? Was Veneta real? A parable? A warning? A rewriting of history in real time? Perhaps the real question isn't what happened to Veneta, but why we chose to forget it. Cities don't simply disappear, but stories can be erased, and when the story is erased, the place goes with it. So tonight, as you rest and drift between memory and imagination, remember the city that vanished, not beneath the waves, but beneath silence. The place that once was, and maybe still is, if only we were allowed to remember it. Wars usually leave behind scars, broken cities, crumbling monuments, graves, songs of sorrow, and documents inked in pain. But what if there was a war that left behind nothing? No battlefield remains, no victors, no monuments, just faint whispers. That is the strange case of the War of the Bucket, a real conflict, but one that history has buried under ridicule, confusion, and silence. It began in 1325, between the rival Italian city-states of Modena and Bologna. The cause, according to legend, Modenese soldiers raided Bologna and stole a wooden bucket. That's right, a simple wooden pail. In retaliation, Bologna declared war, determined to retrieve the bucket and restore its honor. The conflict escalated, armies were raised, and blood was spilled. But here's where the paradox begins. Despite being a recorded historical event, almost everything about this war feels like a joke. And maybe that's the point. The War of the Bucket is said to have ended in a Modenese victory. Bologna suffered heavy losses, and to this day, Modena allegedly still keeps the bucket locked away in a tower as a war trophy. But ask historians about the war, and you'll find contradiction. Some say the bucket wasn't the cause at all, that it was merely a symbol of deeper political tension masked by absurdity. Others claim the entire event was exaggerated by satirical poets centuries later. A real battle may have occurred, but the bucket? That might have been added later to hide the true reason for the war, or perhaps to erase it. And that's where the paradox truly lives. Wars are often whitewashed, glorified, or revised, but this one may have been deliberately made absurd, so it would be laughed out of historical memory, as if mocking its own violence was the only way to cleanse it from the record. Because what if the war wasn't about a bucket at all? What if it was about religion, or power, or forbidden alliances that had to be covered up? Turning the story into comedy makes it easier to forget. The more ridiculous the cause, the less seriously anyone will ever investigate. Even today, the War of the Bucket is referenced mostly in trivia books, humorous lectures, and light-hearted museum exhibits. It is never mourned, never studied in depth. It's become a historical shrug, a punchline, not a lesson. But behind that laughter might be something darker, a forgotten massacre, a betrayal too dangerous to document, or a pact that never should have been broken. What makes a war real? The bloodshed, the memory, the documentation, or the lesson it leaves behind? In this case, the war may have been real, but its meaning was erased, not with fire, not with censorship, but with mockery. So as you drift tonight through the corridors of forgotten time, imagine a battlefield where every truth was buried under laughter. A war where forgetting wasn't a mistake, it was the objective. Not all erasures are done in silence. Some are done with a joke, and maybe that's the most dangerous kind. We remember the great empires, Rome, the Ottomans, the British. We carve them into stone, etch them into textbooks, and teach their legacies in classrooms across the world. But not all empires leave behind glory. Some dissolve not with fire or conquest, but with silence. One such enigma is the Khazar Empire, a powerful, complex civilization that once bridged East and West, and then vanished almost entirely from history. The Khazars ruled a vast region between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea from the 7th to the 10th century. They were Turkic in origin, fierce in warfare, and brilliant in diplomacy. They built fortified cities, minted coins, and taxed the Silk Road trade routes. At their height, they were strong enough to repel Arab invasions and stand as a buffer between the Islamic caliphates and Christian Byzantium. But the Khazars weren't just powerful, they were unique. In a decision that still baffles historians, the Khazar elite converted, not to Christianity or Islam, but to Judaism. Around the 8th century, the ruling class and segments of the population adopted Jewish customs, laws, and religion. The Khazar king, or Khagan, corresponded with other Jewish leaders. He established religious courts. He reshaped his empire's cultural identity in a way no other major power ever had. And then, the empire disappeared. By the 11th century, the Khazar Empire was no more. Conquered, fragmented, or absorbed. No one quite knows. Its cities vanished. Its records were lost. Its people were scattered. Even today, there's intense academic debate over who the Khazars were, what they believed, and where their descendants may have gone. Some theories suggest they merged into Slavic populations. Others controversially connect them to later Jewish communities in Eastern Europe, a theory debated and politicized for over a century. But here's the paradox. How does an empire this unique, this influential, get almost completely erased from the mainstream historical narrative? It isn't just that the Khazars are forgotten, it's that they're deliberately ignored. Rarely mentioned in Western history, brushed aside in Eastern records, and treated as a footnote in Jewish scholarship. Their story is too complex, too contradictory, too inconvenient. A powerful Jewish empire that defied Christian and Muslim expansion doesn't fit neatly into the grand narratives that modern nations use to define their past. Some historians argue that the Khazars were purposefully written out, suppressed by both Christian chroniclers and Islamic historians who found their existence uncomfortable. Others believe their disappearance was just another casualty of time, conquest, and assimilation. But what if it was something else? What if the Khazars understood that survival required invisibility? That the best way to protect their people, their traditions, their story, was to let the world forget? Empires are supposed to leave legacies, monuments, ruins, records, myths. But the Khazars left behind only questions. They were real, they were powerful, and now they are almost entirely gone. As you drift tonight, think of them, not as ghosts of history, but as architects of their own disappearance. A forgotten empire that may have chosen vanishing over destruction. A people whose story survives, not in textbooks, but in fragments, hints, and silence. Sometimes, what history forgets says more than what it remembers. In the late 1800s, a man named John Ernst Worrell Keely stood on the edge of transforming the modern world. His invention, known simply as the Keely motor, was said to be a self-sustaining engine powered by vibrations and etheric force, a mysterious energy that defied all known laws of physics. Journalists, engineers, and investors gathered to witness his machine in action. They watched it lift heavy weights, spin with silent power, and run without any visible fuel source. And then, the invention disappeared. The Keely motor was more than just a curious machine. It represented the promise of limitless, clean energy in an age defined by steam, coal, and smoke. Keely claimed he had discovered a way to tap into the primal forces of the universe itself, a kind of sympathetic vibration that allowed matter to move and energy to flow in perfect harmony. He spoke of frequency, resonance, and hidden forces long before quantum physics would even begin to theorize similar ideas. For over 20 years, Keely showcased his inventions to the public, securing substantial funding from powerful industrialists and wealthy patrons. He remained secretive, guarding the inner workings of his devices with religious intensity. Whenever scientists asked to examine the motor, Keely refused. He insisted the world wasn't ready to understand. Then, in 1898, Keely died, and what followed is where the paradox begins. Investigators entered his workshop, expecting to uncover blueprints, equations, or perhaps the physical proof of a new scientific age. But what they found instead shocked them. Hidden tubes, compressed air tanks, wires running through the floorboards, suggesting that the motor had been powered all along by conventional means, carefully concealed. Many declared him a fraud, The newspapers turned on him. His name became a cautionary tale of pseudoscience and misplaced faith. And yet, not everything adds up. Some of Keely's demonstrations involved sealed rooms, distant machinery, and actions that couldn't be explained by simple air pressure. Witnesses, credible ones, reported effects that could not have been faked with the technology of the time. And strangely, all of Keely's notes, diagrams, and technical writings were gone. Missing, vanished overnight, destroyed or stolen. We may never know. Was Keely a genius far ahead of his time? Or an illusionist with a flair for industrial theatre? The paradox lies in how easily his potential was erased. How quickly a world-changing idea was dismissed. What if his motor worked, but was never meant to reach the world? What if powerful interests saw the threat of infinite energy and chose silence over progress? The Keely motor is no longer studied. It isn't taught in schools. There's no monument, no preserved prototype, just a few grainy illustrations and sensational headlines. But its ghost lingers in forums, obscure journals, and conspiracy theories about suppressed inventions. So tonight, as you slip into quiet thought, remember the machine that promised everything and left nothing. Ask yourself, how many discoveries are buried not in failure, but in fear? How many ideas have been lost, not because they didn't work, but because they did? Not all vanishings are accidents. Some are erased, because the future they offer is too dangerous for the present. History is full of plagues, some well documented, others less so. We know of the Black Death, the Spanish flu, and countless outbreaks that reshaped societies and scarred generations. But in the 6th century, there was a pandemic so devastating that it nearly broke the spine of an empire. And yet, to this day, no one knows where it came from. It is known as the Plague of Justinian, and its origins are a mystery that still unsettles historians. The year was 541 CE. The Byzantine Empire, under the rule of Emperor Justinian III, was at its height. Constantinople gleamed with gold and marble, and Justinian's armies were expanding his influence across the Mediterranean. Then, from seemingly nowhere, people began to die. First in Egypt, then Palestine, then Constantinople. The symptoms were terrifying: fever, delirium, swollen lymph nodes, blackened limbs. Entire districts of the city fell silent. Corpses were loaded onto carts, stacked in towers, dumped into the sea. At its peak, the plague of Justinian was killing as many as 10,000 people per day in Constantinople alone. But here's where the paradox begins. While we know the effect of the plague, we still can't pinpoint its cause. Most historians agree it was a form of bubonic plague caused by the bacterium Yersinia pestis, but genetic evidence is inconsistent. Some strains traced to the outbreak don't match the strains we see in later plagues like the Black Death. And what's more puzzling, there's no clear record of how it arrived. It didn't follow the usual patterns of trade or conquest. There's no detailed account of a ship carrying infected rats. There's no clear epicenter. It was as if the disease simply appeared, everywhere at once. Modern scholars have debated its entry point for years. Was it brought by soldiers? Spread through grain shipments? Carried by migrating birds or even climate shifts? None of the theories quite fit. And then there's the eerie silence in some surrounding regions. While Constantinople was devastated, some neighboring cities reported nothing. No deaths, no disease, just normal life, as if the plague respected invisible borders. The plague of Justinian eventually burned itself out, only to reappear in waves over the next 2 centuries. It weakened the Byzantine Empire so severely that it never fully recovered. Justinian's dream of a restored Roman Empire collapsed in its wake, and then, as suddenly as it had come, it disappeared from the historical spotlight. Why do we barely remember it? A pandemic that may have killed 50 million people and yet receives a fraction of the attention of later outbreaks. Is it because it happened in a time we choose not to focus on? Or is it something else? Something intentionally obscured? There are theories, of course, that the plague was engineered, that it came from a forgotten reservoir deep in the east, that it was a mutation that only briefly aligned with human vulnerability. Or maybe, and this is the most haunting thought of all, it came from somewhere we still don't understand, somewhere we don't want to look, a plague without a beginning, a catastrophe without a source. It's not just a biological mystery, it's a historical riddle. And as the centuries stretch further from it, the silence around its origin grows louder. So tonight, as you let your mind drift through the corridors of lost time, remember the sickness that crept in without warning, took millions, and vanished, as if history itself wanted to forget where it came from. Some plagues leave scars. This one left a shadow, and in that shadow the truth still hides. In the grand halls of monarchy, the crown is more than a symbol. It is legitimacy itself. Kings and queens may inherit power by blood, but it is the coronation that transforms inheritance into rule. But what happens when a man rules a kingdom, commands armies, and reshapes history without ever wearing the crown? This is the paradox of Edward V of England, the boy king who vanished before he was crowned, and whose story still lingers in silence. Edward V became king at just 12 years old, following the death of his father, Edward IV, in 1483. As was tradition, he was sent to the Tower of London to await his coronation. But he was never crowned. Within weeks, the young king and his younger brother Richard simply disappeared. The official explanation, or at least the one whispered into the pages of history, is that Edward and his brother were quietly murdered, most likely on the orders of their uncle Richard, Duke of Gloucester, who seized the throne and became Richard III. Many believe the boys were suffocated in their sleep, their bodies buried in secret. But the truth is far murkier and stranger. No public execution, no trials, no royal burial, no official death, just silence. The two heirs were never seen again, and yet Richard III took the throne with remarkable speed, insisting that Edward IV's marriage had been invalid and that Edward V was illegitimate. It was a claim built on shaky evidence, but enough to convince Parliament. The coronation never happened. The child king was erased, not with poison or sword, but with paperwork. But here's where the paradox deepens. Decades later, under the rule of Henry VII, two boys claimed to be Edward V and his brother, survivors of the Tower. They were dismissed as impostors. One, Perkin Warbeck, even gathered an army. But he was captured and executed. Still, the rumor refused to die. In 1674, workers renovating the Tower of London discovered the skeletal remains of two young boys hidden beneath a staircase. Were these the lost princes? No one could confirm. The bones were quietly buried in Westminster Abbey, but the identity remains unproven. No DNA, no names, just two bodies, centuries too late. So who was Edward V? A king? A prisoner? A ghost? He ruled in name for just over 2 months. A reign without power, without ceremony, without closure. And yet he remains one of England's monarchs. A king without a crown, without a tomb, without a story that anyone can tell with certainty. Some Historians now argue that Richard III wasn't the villain after all, that others, like the Duke of Buckingham or even agents of Henry VII, may have killed the princes to strengthen their own claims. The deeper you go into the records, the more contradictions appear. No one knows for sure who was behind the disappearance, or if the boys were even killed. This is the strange nature of history. Sometimes it forgets. Other times it pretends to remember. Edward V sits at the heart of this contradiction. Present in royal lists, absent in memory, a monarch without a moment. So, as you close your eyes tonight, drifting through shadows and stories, remember the king who ruled but never reigned. A boy caught in a web of ambition, power, and silence. A name whispered through the stones of a tower. Sometimes the crown isn't stolen. Sometimes it's simply never given. In the modern age, satellites orbit the planet, submarines explore the seafloor, and digital maps cover every inch of Earth's surface. And yet, there exists the tale of an island, once charted, once visited, that simply vanished from the sea without leaving a single ripple behind. This is the story of Bermeja, the island that was there, until it wasn't. For centuries, maps of the Gulf of Mexico showed a small, uninhabited island just off the northern coast of the Yucatan Peninsula. Spanish explorers in the 16th century documented it. Maritime records confirmed it. It was known as Isla Bermeja, and it appeared consistently in nautical charts as late as the 20th century. Then, sometime after the 1940s, it disappeared. Without volcanic activity, without erosion, without a trace. This wasn't just a cartographic error. Bermeja was real enough to affect geopolitics. In the late 1990s, during negotiations between Mexico and the United States over rights to lucrative oil reserves in the Gulf, Bermeja became a critical piece of the puzzle. If the island still existed, it would extend Mexico's territorial claim, giving the country rights over untapped petroleum deposits worth billions. In response, the Mexican government sent multiple expeditions to locate the island. Radar scans, sonar sweeps, divers, and advanced cartographic analysis were deployed. But Bermeja wasn't there. No reef, no submerged landmass, no underwater ridge, nothing. So what happened to it? Some scientists propose that Bermeja had eroded over centuries or been submerged due to rising sea levels. But this explanation doesn't hold. The sea level changes in the region wouldn't have swallowed an entire island without leaving so, much as a shoal. Others blamed inaccurate map-making by early explorers, but the island's consistent placement across hundreds of years and dozens of maps challenges that idea too. And then came the theories. Some whispered that Bermeja had been destroyed deliberately, blown up or erased by foreign powers who sought to shift territorial boundaries in their favor. Others believed it was removed from maps in a quiet act of political manipulation to avoid international legal entanglements. And some said it had never existed at all, that it was a fabrication, a shared illusion perpetuated by generations of cartographers who had simply copied each other's mistakes. But if it never existed, why was it so important? Why did explorers note its presence centuries ago? Why did entire nations plan economic strategies around its location? Here lies the paradox. Bermeja is a place that was known until it was no longer convenient to know it. Its disappearance isn't just about geography, it's about power, memory, and the ease with which reality can be edited. We often think of the map as the most objective thing in the world. Lines, coordinates, unchanging truths. But maps lie, and sometimes they forget. Whether Bermeja was a casualty of nature, politics, or deliberate erasure, its absence raises a chilling question. If something can be erased from every record, Did it ever truly exist? As you drift tonight into sleep, picture the ocean in perfect stillness. Beneath it, perhaps, the ghost of an island sleeps, forgotten or hidden or silenced. Somewhere, coordinates still point to nothing, and in that nothing is everything we don't want to see. Some islands are lost to time, others are removed from it. In most battles, the victors shape the future. They redraw maps, write treaties, and tell the stories that echo for centuries. But what if a battle could do more than change the future? What if it could alter our understanding of time itself? This is the paradox of the Battle of Gaugamela, fought in 331 BCE, where Alexander the Great faced the vast Persian Empire, and where, some argue, time fractured in the records themselves. The official story is clear enough. Alexander, with his outnumbered Macedonian forces, defeated King Darius III's massive Persian army through brilliant tactics, discipline, and sheer momentum. It was the defining moment of Alexander's conquest of Asia. The Persian Empire collapsed, and Western history would never be the same. But here's where the paradox begins. Multiple ancient sources describe the same event, but their timelines don't match. Some place the battle in early autumn, others claim it occurred in midsummer. Astronomical data referenced in the records, such as planetary alignments and eclipses, don't align with the actual sky of 331 BCE. Some versions describe the battlefield, geography in ways that contradict known terrain. And in rare Babylonian cuneiform tablets, there's an account of the battle being won by Darius. How can a single, well-documented battle have so many timelines, outcomes, and distortions? Some historians chalk it up to translation errors, propaganda, or oral history gone awry. That's reasonable, until you realize that the astronomical anomalies are too precise to be accidental. Babylonian astronomers were meticulous. They recorded the position of planets, stars, and eclipses with astonishing accuracy. If they say a certain celestial event occurred during the battle, but modern astronomy says it didn't, it raises uncomfortable questions. Is it possible that history, as we know it, has anchored itself to the wrong date? Even more unsettling is the suggestion by a handful of scholars that the chronology of ancient history is fundamentally flawed. They propose that several major ancient events, Egyptian dynasties, early Persian rule, even parts of Roman history, may have been duplicated, shifted, or collapsed into the wrong centuries. They point to overlapping reigns, duplicated records, and strange absences in the archaeological timeline. The Battle of Gaugamela, they argue, is the keystone, a battle that, if misdated, causes all of ancient history to tilt out of alignment. This theory, called chronological revisionism, is highly controversial. Mainstream academia largely rejects it, but the inconsistencies around Gaugamela persist. Could this battle, so important, so symbolic, have been altered intentionally? Or are we seeing something deeper, a distortion in our perception of time itself? Ancient cultures didn't measure time as we do. Their calendars were lunar, seasonal, astrological. They aligned time with myth and meaning. What if Gaugamela was more than a clash of empires? What if it marked a shift in how humans understood time, moving from mythic cycles to linear conquest? In this sense, the paradox isn't just about a misdated war. It's about a transition from a world where time was sacred and circular to one where time became a weapon, a schedule, a conquest, a world where history could be bent, erased, rewritten. So tonight, as you drift into sleep, imagine that battlefield again. Dust rising, spears clashing, celestial bodies misaligned. Not just a war for territory, but a war for time itself. And, in the silence after the final charge, imagine the clock beginning again. Because maybe history doesn't just record time. Maybe, sometimes it creates it. When we think of lost civilizations, we picture ancient ruins buried in sand or swallowed by jungle. Remnants of people long gone, their stories faded into myth. But what if a civilization didn't vanish beneath the earth, but remained hidden in open view, misunderstood and misnamed? This is the paradox of the Etruscans, a people who shaped the very foundations of Rome, yet whose culture remains one of the great blank spots in Western history. The Etruscans flourished in central Italy for centuries before Rome ever dreamed of empire. Their cities were advanced, their engineering remarkable, their trade networks vast. They built aqueducts, designed intricate road systems, developed metallurgy, and even practiced democratic principles in some city-states. Much of what we now attribute to ancient Rome, the arch, the toga, certain religious rites, originated with the Etruscans. And yet today, the Etruscans are little more than a footnote. Their language remains untranslated, despite thousands of inscriptions. Their origins are debated, their influence often downplayed. How is it that a people who laid the groundwork for one of history's greatest empires have become nearly invisible in the historical narrative? Part of the paradox lies in survival. The Etruscans were gradually absorbed into the Roman Republic. Their cities weren't destroyed, they were repurposed. Their gods were renamed, their symbols woven into Roman identity. And as Rome grew, it wrote the story of its own greatness by quietly erasing its predecessor. Imagine a culture so influential that it becomes indistinguishable from the one that overtakes it. Not conquered with fire, but absorbed so completely that it disappears without vanishing. A civilization that survives in architecture, language, ritual, yet not in memory. But there's another layer. Though the Romans left behind libraries of text, the Etruscans did not. They wrote, extensively, it seems, but their writing system, while decipherable phonetically, is largely untranslatable. We can read the words aloud, but we don't understand what they mean. Names, titles, rituals, all pass before our eyes like shadows behind glass. Their literature is gone. Their myths, silent. Some linguists argue the Etruscan language has no known relatives. Others link it to distant cultures in the Near East, or even suggest it was a preserved remnant of a much older, forgotten people. Whatever the case, the result is the same: a civilization that stands before us, but refuses to speak. Artifacts are everywhere. Tombs with exquisite murals, jewelry, pottery, statues of smiling figures who seem to know something we don't. And yet, with all this evidence, we still don't truly know who the Etruscans were. Perhaps that's the strangest part. They are not hidden in a jungle or buried under centuries of dust. Their cities became Rome's cities. Their culture became Rome's culture. Their blood likely still runs through the veins of millions, and yet they remain strangers. It's easy to forget what's right in front of us. Sometimes erasure isn't done with destruction, it's done with relabeling, by rewriting names, histories, legacies, by absorbing the conquered until the conqueror forgets they were ever different. So tonight, as you close your eyes and imagine the ancient hills of Italy, picture the stones beneath Rome's streets. Listen to the quiet voices carved into marble. Imagine a people whose greatness was so profound, it vanished not in defeat, but in adoption. Not all forgotten civilizations are lost. Some are simply unseen. In the world's most secure libraries, amid ancient scrolls and preserved tomes, there sits a book that defies every attempt at understanding. Its pages are filled with strange diagrams, unrecognizable plants, astrological charts, and a looping script that no one has ever deciphered. It's not encrypted. It's simply unknown. This is the paradox of the Voynich manuscript, a book that exists in full view, yet remains a complete mystery. The manuscript is named after Wilfrid Voynich, the rare book dealer who purchased it in 1912. But the book itself is far older, carbon dated to the early 15th century. Its pages are made of vellum, calfskin parchment, beautifully preserved. It contains over 200 pages of text and illustrations, yet not a single word can be read. The writing system doesn't match any known language. It flows with the rhythm of real words. There's grammar, spacing, repetition. But the characters don't resemble Latin, Greek, Arabic, Hebrew, or any other ancient script. Cryptographers, linguists, AI programs, even the NSA have tried to decode it. Every time, they've failed. This is not a case of a forgotten dialect. It is something else entirely. What deepens the paradox is that the book is so deliberate. The handwriting is careful, the illustrations precise. The plants drawn inside are not recognizably real, but they follow botanical logic, roots, stems, flowers, yet no one has found a single match in nature. The diagrams seem to chart stars and celestial movements, but they don't correspond to any known constellations. The book includes what look like recipes, rituals, or formulas, accompanied by nude women bathing in strange mechanisms, connected by flowing tubes of liquid. It's as if someone recorded a complete system of knowledge, science, medicine, philosophy, from a world no one else has ever seen. Some believe it was an elaborate hoax, a meaningless jumble of nonsense designed to fool scholars and collectors. But this theory collapses under its own weight. Why would someone spend years creating a 200-page fake language, complete with structure, syntax, and illustrations, in an age when books took lifetimes to produce? Others believe it's a coded language, known only to a select few. Perhaps the private notebook of a secret order, or the encrypted knowledge of an alchemist. But the cipher, if it exists, has never been broken. And then there are stranger theories. That the book came from another world. That it's a relic from a forgotten civilization. That it's written in a language designed not for communication, but for meditation or magic. What if it wasn't meant to be understood by us? What if it was meant to preserve something sacred? Something meant only for the eyes of its author and no one else? The Voynich manuscript sits in the Beinecke Rare Book library at Yale University. You can view it online, turn the pages, stare at the strange flowers and indecipherable text. It's real. It's here. And yet it may as well have come from another dimension. That's the paradox. A book that shouldn't exist. A manuscript that speaks in a language we can see, but not know. A message from someone to no one. So, as you drift into sleep, imagine holding that book in your hands, running your fingers over the ink, knowing that every word has meaning, just not for you, not for anyone alive. Some secrets don't hide in the dark. They hide in plain sight, patient, silent, and waiting. Explorers are remembered for charting lands, sailing seas, and discovering what was once unknown. But what if one explorer didn't just discover new geography? What if he discovered time? Not by science, not through machinery, but through mystery. This is the strange and haunting paradox of Alonso de Arellano, a 16th century navigator whose return from the Pacific left behind more questions than answers. because somehow he may have seen the world before it happened. In 1564, Spain launched an ambitious expedition across the Pacific Ocean, seeking a return route from the Philippines to Mexico. Led by Miguel López de Legazpi, the fleet set sail with 4 ships. Among them was Alonso de Arellano, captain of the San Lucas, who became separated from the fleet shortly after departure. While the others followed the known path, Arellano's ship vanished into the Pacific and returned first, months ahead of the others, with details no one expected him to know. When Arellano reappeared in Mexico, he brought with him precise notes about the locations of islands, sea currents, and weather patterns that had not yet been discovered. He detailed a viable return route across the vast Pacific, something no one had managed before. Somehow, he had accomplished what countless sailors had failed to do: find the eastward crossing from Asia back to the Americas. But the official record rejected him. His report was dismissed. His logbooks were questioned. The crown gave credit to another captain, Andrés de Urdaneta, who returned later using the same route, but who received the fame and reward. Arellano was quietly ignored. Why? Historians claim he may have stolen Urdaneta's information, that he returned too quickly, that his findings were too advanced, too detailed, too early. There were even whispers that his ship never left sight of land, or that he fabricated parts of his journey. But none of these theories explain how he knew what he knew, or how he survived a voyage that had doomed so many before him. And here's where the paradox deepens. Years later, sailors retracing his route found everything just as he described: islands, winds, the current that would become known as the Kuroshio. And yet, Arellano's name remains obscure, a footnote in maritime history. What if he didn't guess? What if he didn't steal? What if he saw what others hadn't? Because he had somehow stepped out of sequence with time. There are strange currents in the Pacific, vortices, weather anomalies, regions where compasses spin and time seems to stretch. The ancient Polynesians spoke of veils between worlds hidden in the ocean's depths. Could Arellano's ship have drifted into such a place, a fold in time where knowledge flows forward and backward like the tide? Or was it something simpler? Perhaps he had dreams, visions, a sailor's instinct so refined it bordered on prophecy. But that raises another, unsettling idea, that history is not linear but looping, that someone somewhere always knows what's coming and is ignored. Arellano returned with answers no one was ready for. His reward was silence. His punishment? Erasure. Maybe because it was easier to honor the expected hero than to acknowledge a man who saw too much. So tonight, as the waves of thought rock you to sleep, imagine a lone ship, lost in the blue infinity. Its captain, staring at stars no one else has mapped, recording the future in ink, only to be forgotten by the present. Not every explorer finds new land. Some find what hasn't happened yet and are never believed. Throughout history, prophets are remembered not for their peace, but for their disturbance. They shake kingdoms, challenge the powerful, and whisper uncomfortable truths before the world is ready to hear them. Some are canonized, others are killed. But some are simply erased, their words forgotten, their names lost, their visions buried under centuries of dust. This is the paradox of the Sibyl of Tibur, a prophetess revered by emperors, feared by priests, and ultimately silenced by time. In ancient Rome, the Sibyls were female oracles said to channel divine wisdom. Among them, the Tiburtine Sibyl who lived near modern-day Tivoli, was one of the most mysterious. Her prophecies were said to span centuries, foretelling the fall of empires, the rise of Christianity, even apocalyptic visions of fire, famine, and salvation. According to medieval texts, she predicted not just events, but the shape of time itself. She was consulted by Roman emperors. She appeared in Christian legends. Even Renaissance thinkers spoke of her in reverent tones. And yet, today, her prophecies are fragmented, scattered, and doubted. Entire books once attributed to her have vanished. What remains is cryptic. Lines of poetry in strange Latin, medieval paintings of a crowned woman holding scrolls, and whispers of predictions no one can quite trace. What happened to her? One surviving legend tells of a moment when the Sibyl offered 9 scrolls of prophecy to a Roman king. When he refused to buy them, she burned 3. When he refused again, she burned 3 more. Only after losing 6 did the king panic and buy the final 3 for the full price. It's a parable about knowledge ignored until it's almost too late. But some believe it's more than a parable. The burned scrolls represent deliberate erasure. Knowledge that was too dangerous, too prophetic, too politically inconvenient. Throughout history, religious and political authorities have destroyed texts that question their power. Could the same fate have met the Sibyl's full works? There are also stories that the Sibyl predicted the coming of a child born of a virgin, who would be the ruler of the ages. Early Christians interpreted this as a prophecy of Christ. For a time, she was even depicted on cathedral walls alongside biblical prophets. But later, her image faded. The church eventually moved away from such associations, uncomfortable with the idea that a pagan woman had foretold the central figure of Christianity. What does it mean when a prophet is no longer useful? It means she is no longer remembered. Here lies the paradox. A figure once revered across empires, now surviving only in riddles. Her voice was heard by kings, yet not one of her full prophecies remains intact. We remember her presence, but not her message. Some say she never existed at all, that the Sibyl is a collection of myths, a composite of poetic imagination. But if that were true, why did so many treat her as real? Why did leaders, scholars, and artists continue to refer to her for over 1,000 years? Perhaps the truth is this: the Sibyl of Tibur did speak, but what she said was never meant to last. Not because it wasn't true, but because it was too true, because power fears prophecy that can't be controlled. So as you rest tonight, imagine a woman standing at the edge of a Roman temple, scrolls in hand, her voice echoing across the marble, speaking of futures no one wants to admit, warning of rises and falls not yet written. And as the wind scatters her pages into the dust, remember, some prophets aren't silenced by death, they're silenced by forgetting. In the heart of Prague, nestled in the old town square, stands one of the oldest and most beautiful timepieces in the world, the Prague astronomical clock, or horloge. Built in 1410, it tracks not just the hour, but the phases of the moon, the path of the sun, the zodiac, and even the position of certain stars. It's an engineering marvel, an intersection of science, mythology, and art. But there's a lesser-known chapter to this story, one that speaks of a clock that once ran backward, and the unsettling consequences that followed. The legend goes like this. In the 17th century, during one of Prague's many occupations, a mysterious modification was made to the horloge. A group of scholars seeking to unlock secrets hidden in celestial time reconfigured the mechanism so that one of its dials, some say the zodiac ring, others the lunar tracker, began to rotate in reverse. Not broken, not jammed, deliberately reversed. At first, no one noticed, but over time, the city changed. Merchants began to report strange repetitions, transactions they swore they had already completed, customers who claimed they had already paid, weather patterns repeated unnaturally. People began dreaming of events before they occurred. A child predicted a death in the town square, days before it happened, exactly as described. One elderly watchmaker claimed he saw his younger self walk past him silently, just once. And then came the plague, not the kind that spreads through rats or water, but something less visible, a wave of unrest, anxiety, and confusion. People spoke less. Shadows seemed longer. It was as if time itself had become unstuck. The church ordered the clock to be restored. The backward mechanism was removed. The dials were reset to their proper motion. And almost immediately, the strange occurrences stopped, but the memory remained. People whispered that time had reversed itself, if only for a few weeks, and that Prague had become a place out of sequence, even briefly touching its own past. Here's the paradox. There is no official record of this event, no diagrams, no historical papers, just oral accounts, fragmented writings, and a few odd gaps in local archives, dates where documents should exist, but don't. The clock itself bears no physical evidence of ever having run backwards, and yet the story persists. Some historians dismiss it as folklore, a parable about the dangers of tampering with nature, but others believe something stranger occurred, that a temporal loop was created, however small, by the manipulation of celestial gears. After all, the horloge isn't just a clock, it's a symbolic machine that represents the universe, a model of the cosmos. What happens when you reverse a model of time? Does the symbol affect the thing it represents? Or could it be that Prague experienced something like a glitch, a moment where human perception, mechanical rhythm, and astronomical movement fell out of sync? A city briefly drifting through a fold in time, anchored only by the silent movement of its most ancient machine. Modern physicists now speculate on time loops, retrocausality, and the possibility of events that ripple backwards. But centuries ago, perhaps someone in Prague didn't just imagine it, they built it. So tonight, as you close your eyes and listen to the ticking clock of your own mind, imagine its hands stuttering, slowing, and then turning the other way. Would you notice the first repetition, the faint déjà vu, the dream that becomes memory before it happens? Time, they say, only moves forward. But what if, just once, it didn't? Most nations fall through war, invasion, or internal collapse. Flags are torn down, leaders overthrown, borders redrawn. But there is one strange moment in history when a nation didn't fall. It voted itself out of existence. This is the paradox of the free city of Danzig, a place that chose to erase itself before anyone else could. The free city of Danzig, modern-day Gdansk, Poland, was a semi-independent city-state established after World War I. Neither fully Polish nor German, it existed under the protection of the League of Nations. It had its own currency, postal service, and government, but its people were mostly German-speaking, its economy tied to Poland, and its identity suspended in political limbo. It was a compromise born of diplomacy, a buffer zone between rising nationalisms. But compromises are fragile things. As tensions in Europe grew in the 1930s, so did the voices within Danzig calling for unification with Nazi Germany. And then, in a moment that still puzzles historians, the people of Danzig began voting, not in one election, but across many, small steps, to dissolve their own sovereignty. In city council decisions, referenda, and popular movements, they stripped away their neutrality. They banned opposition parties, replaced local law with German law, flew Nazi flags, and slowly dismantled the city's independence. By the time Germany invaded Poland in 1939, Danzig was no longer the free city it had once been. It had already erased itself legally, ideologically, and spiritually. Here's the paradox: the people weren't conquered. They chose it, piece by piece, vote by vote, not with a single act, but through a series of small, seemingly rational decisions that added up to national suicide. Why? Some say it was cultural alignment, others, economic pressure, fear, propaganda. But perhaps the real answer is more disturbing: that a nation can willingly destroy itself, not by rebellion or betrayal, but by majority rule. We often think of democracy as the safeguard against tyranny, but Danzig shows us the darker side, that democracy can be used to vote freedom away. When fear outweighs trust, when identity overrides truth, when unity is mistaken for obedience, then even liberty can be put to a vote. And once it is, history shows it rarely comes back. After the war, Danzig was absorbed into Poland. Its German population was expelled. The city was rebuilt, renamed, and reintegrated. But the memory of the free city faded. It exists now mostly in old stamps, fading documents, and a few surviving buildings. A nation that chose not to be. No monument marks the moment Danzig ceased to exist. Not because it was forgotten, but because there was no single moment. Just a long, quiet erasure. One that no one stopped. So tonight, as you rest, think about the borders of identity. The thin line between belonging and erasure. And the haunting truth that a people can choose their own end, not with swords, but with silence. Because sometimes the most powerful way to destroy a nation is to let it vote. Languages die all the time. When the last speaker passes away, when the final story is never told again, the language disappears. Not with an explosion, but with a whisper. But what happens when a language refuses to die? When it survives, despite every attempt to erase it? This is the paradox of Basque, a language spoken in the mountains of northern Spain and southwestern France, with no known relatives, no clear origin, and no reason to still exist. Basque is what linguists call a language isolate. It is not descended from Latin, like Spanish or French. It is not connected to Celtic, Germanic, Slavic, or any Indo-European root. It predates them all. Basque existed in Europe before the Roman Empire, before the Greeks, possibly even before written history. And yet, while empires rose and fell, while dialects merged and evolved, Basque remained. It is the oldest living language in Europe, and no one knows where it came from. Scholars have tried to link it to everything from ancient African dialects to long-lost Asian tongues. None of the connections hold. It is a linguistic orphan, a language with no family tree. Some even believe it may be the last remnant of a prehistoric civilization, a ghost language that survived while its siblings vanished thousands of years ago, and perhaps even stranger, the more people tried to kill it, the more it endured. During the reign of Franco in Spain, the Basque language was outlawed. Speaking it in public was forbidden. Schools were banned from teaching it. Books were burned, signs were changed, and children were punished for using it. It was an attempt to erase not just words, but identity. But the language survived in secret, in kitchens and quiet homes, in coded letters, in lullabies whispered at bedtime, and after decades of silence, it emerged again, stronger. The Basque people rebuilt their schools, their dictionaries, their pride. They created radio stations, literature, even entire universities in a language that the world had tried to bury. Here lies the paradox. Basque shouldn't be here. By all logic, it should have vanished like so many others. It had no imperial army to defend it, no global religion to spread it, no colonial power to carry it overseas. And yet it lives, and not just lives, but thrives. It is as if the language carries within it something more than words, a refusal. What is it that makes a language impossible to kill? Is it structure, geography, or something spiritual, something tied to memory, blood, and land? Basque doesn't just communicate, it remembers. It carries stories that no other language can tell, concepts that exist nowhere else. And in doing so, it becomes a living archive of a world we barely understand. But perhaps the most haunting part is this: we may never know who first spoke it. The people who created Basque left no written record, no empire, no legend, just sound, and somehow, that sound endured for over 10,000 years. So tonight, as your thoughts drift across time, listen for the voices that were never meant to survive, the ones whispered in secret, sung in exile, carved into air by generations who refused to forget. Because sometimes, the oldest truths are the ones no one wanted you to hear, and the languages meant to die are the ones that never will. We often think of history as a grand portrait, painted by victors, curated by empires, and framed by power. But what happens when that portrait is altered? When the brushstrokes are changed, when a face is blurred or worse, replaced entirely? This is the paradox of Queen Nefertiti, a ruler whose image is one of the most iconic in ancient history, and yet whose true story may have been deliberately erased. You've likely seen her, Nefertiti, the Egyptian queen with the elegant neck and blue crown. Her bust sits in museums, replicated endlessly in art and textbooks. She's praised for her beauty, her poise, her influence, and yet, beyond that single statue, almost nothing is certain. Nefertiti was the wife of Pharaoh Akhenaten, a radical ruler who tried to reshape Egypt's religion by worshipping a single god, the Aten, the sun disk. Together, they ruled during one of the most controversial and mysterious periods in Egyptian history. And then, she vanished. There are no records of her death, no confirmed tomb, no official depiction of her in her later years. For a queen so prominent, this silence is deafening. It's as if someone took a brush to her name and began to paint over it. And that might be exactly what happened. After Akhenaten's death, Egypt swiftly abandoned his religious revolution and returned to its old gods. His city was deserted, his monuments defaced, his name removed from inscriptions, and Nefertiti, she was either swept away in the backlash or she became something more. Some scholars now believe Nefertiti may have ruled Egypt as a pharaoh under a different name, Smenkhkare. Others argue she became co-regent with her stepson, the young Tutankhamun. In both theories, she didn't vanish, she was rewritten. Her identity became so controversial, so entangled in political and religious upheaval, that erasing her was easier than explaining her. Chisel out her name, change the titles, replace her images, paint her over. Even the iconic bust that defines her image, discovered in 1912, may not tell the whole truth. X-ray scans of the sculpture reveal an inner layer, a second face beneath the surface, more aged, more human. It's as if the original sculptor crafted a realistic version first, then smoothed it out, idealized it, made her perfect. The literal face of Nefertiti has been modified twice over. So which version was real? The queen? The co-pharaoh? The idealized beauty? The forgotten ruler? Here lies the paradox. Nefertiti is everywhere, yet her story is nowhere. We know her features better than almost any woman from antiquity, but we cannot say with certainty when she died, what she ruled, or even what name she carried at the end of her life. History has preserved her image while erasing her essence. But why? Was it to protect Egypt's narrative? To remove a woman from power in a society uncomfortable with her reign? Or was she too deeply tied to a failed revolution? Too dangerous? To remember clearly, this isn't just about Nefertiti, it's about how easily history can be edited, not with fire, but with silence, by choosing what to show, and more importantly, what not to say. So tonight, as your thoughts drift through ancient halls and golden tombs, imagine a queen stepping into the light, only to be shaded over, stroke by stroke. Not because she failed, but because she dared to redefine the frame itself. Some rulers are forgotten because they were weak. Others are forgotten because they were too powerful to remember. When we think of war, we imagine battlefields, armies clashing, weapons drawn, orders shouted across trenches. But there was once a war where no bullets were fired, no soldiers fell, and no battle ever took place. Yet it lasted over 300 years. This is the paradox of the so-called 335 Years' War. A conflict that existed only on paper, yet remained officially active for centuries. The war began in 1651, during the tail end of the English Civil War. The Royalists, loyal to the exiled King Charles II, had retreated to the Isles of Scilly, a small archipelago off the southwestern coast of England. The Dutch, who had supported the parliamentarians, sent a fleet to demand repayment for naval losses inflicted by Royalist pirates operating from the Isles. When the Royalists refused, the Dutch declared war on the Isles of Scilly. And then, nothing happened. There were no battles, no sieges, no casualties. The Dutch fleet soon withdrew, and the political landscape in England shifted. The monarchy was restored. Peace returned. But no one remembered to formally end the war. For centuries, the conflict sat in a legal limbo, not exactly a war, not exactly peace. A clerical oversight that outlived every person involved. The Isles of Scilly went about their business. The Dutch had long forgotten about the declaration. But technically, on parchment, in archives, it still existed. It wasn't until 1986 that a local historian inquired about the forgotten conflict. The Dutch embassy, amused and intrigued, confirmed the story. A peace treaty was finally signed over 300 years later, ending the longest, bloodless war in recorded history. So what do we make of this? It's easy to laugh. A war with no weapons, a conflict with no consequence. But beneath the humor lies a strange and unsettling truth. Sometimes, history isn't shaped by violence, but by neglect. Paperwork left unfiled, agreements left unsigned, wars that persist not because anyone wants them to, but because no one notices they're still happening. Here lies the paradox. A war so insignificant it was forgotten, but so official it never ended. What does it say about the nature of war itself? Is it violence that defines it, or the simple act of declaring it? Even more haunting is the thought that there may be other forgotten conflicts, buried in bureaucratic archives, silently active without a single shot fired. What if history is filled with ghost wars, legal states of hostility with no participants, no memory, just the machinery of diplomacy grinding forward in the dark. The 335 Years' War is a reminder that not all wars are fought with armies. Some are fought with paper, with signatures, with silence, and sometimes, silence can last longer than any battlefield ever could. As you drift tonight into that quiet space between thought and sleep, imagine a war that never roared. A declaration echoing across centuries, unanswered. Not because it was unimportant, but because it was too easily forgotten. Some wars end with treaties, others with surrender, and some end with a smile and a shrug, 300 years too late. Some tombs rewrite history. When opened, they reveal the lives of kings, the secrets of dynasties, or treasures that shake the foundations of archaeology. But there is one tomb, grand, legendary, long sought after, that, when finally uncovered, seemed to promise revelation and delivered nothing at all. This is the paradox of the tomb of Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of China. You may already know the part that captured the world's attention. In 1974, farmers digging a well in China's Shanxi province uncovered the terracotta army. Thousands of life-sized clay soldiers, horses, and chariots standing in silent formation, buried for over 2,000 years. Each figure was unique. Their faces bore expressions. Their armor, weapons, and ranks were carved in stunning detail. But this wasn't the tomb itself. It was just the outer defense, the actual burial site of Qin Shi Huang, the man who unified China, built the Great Wall, and standardized currency and script, is located beneath a massive mound nearby. Ancient texts describe a palace underground, complete with rivers of mercury, ceilings inlaid with stars, and traps designed to kill intruders. It was, according to historians, one of the most ambitious tombs ever constructed. And yet, it has never been opened. The Chinese government has refused to excavate it. Officially, the reasoning is one of preservation, that modern technology is not advanced enough to unseal the tomb without damaging its contents. They point to past mistakes, where ancient sites were destroyed by hasty exploration. But here's where the paradox begins. We found the tomb. We know where it is. Ground-penetrating radar confirms chambers, anomalies, signs of massive construction. Yet it remains sealed, untouched, unconfirmed. It's as if the discovery of the tomb changed nothing at all. What other tomb in human history has been located with such certainty and left untouched for decades? Some suspect deeper reasons. That the contents may be politically inconvenient. That ancient writings discovered nearby suggest truths about the emperor's reign that China's modern narrative prefers not to revisit. Others believe the danger is real, that the tomb contains mercury levels so high, opening it could be toxic. Soil tests around the mound have confirmed elevated mercury levels, exactly where ancient sources said the rivers would flow. There are also whispers of traps, mechanisms built to protect the emperor for eternity, crossbows rigged to fire at intruders, pressure plates, poison gases. Some archaeologists worry that opening the tomb might trigger ancient systems that could destroy its contents, or worse. But deeper still is this question. Why do we need to open it at all? What if the tomb's greatest power is not in what it contains, but in the fact that it remains unseen? A secret so large, so ancient, that it holds authority simply by being withheld. In a world obsessed with uncovering, knowing, exposing, here is a monument that resists. That says, some things were never meant to be touched, and in doing so, it defies the very nature of history itself. Here lies the paradox. The greatest tomb of the ancient world has already been discovered, and yet it remains a mystery. It changed everything. Our understanding of Chinese imperial ambition, the scale of ancient craftsmanship, the spiritual belief in eternal rule, and yet it changed nothing. The door is still closed. The emperor still sleeps. So tonight, as your thoughts grow still, picture the earth above him, the layers of time, the stone corridors no light has touched in 2 millennia, the silence of a palace beneath the ground, and ask yourself, is a secret still a secret when we all know where it is, or is the greatest power of all in refusing to reveal it? Time governs everything, our schedules, our seasons, our sense of self. But once, in the not-so-distant past, a government made time itself illegal, not metaphorically, literally. The clocks were changed, the past was denied, the future was controlled. This is the paradox of Cambodia under the Khmer Rouge, where the regime abolished time, and in doing so, tried to erase history itself. In April 1975, the Khmer Rouge, led by Pol Pot, seized power in Cambodia. Their goal was to create a radical agrarian society, a utopia stripped of class, culture, religion, and memory. To achieve this, they didn't just destroy the old government, they didn't just empty the cities, they reset the calendar. They declared year zero, no history, no birthdays, no anniversaries. The past was a poison, they claimed, a chain linking people to corruption, inequality, and colonialism. In the new Cambodia, time itself began again. Everything that came before was forbidden. People were forced to forget when they were born. Family records were destroyed. Historical books were burned. Schools were shut down. Even clocks and watches were confiscated. You didn't need to know the time. The only moment that mattered was the one the regime dictated. Morning, noon, night. None of it was yours to measure, and it wasn't just symbolic. It was enforced. As the cities were evacuated and the countryside was turned into a network of labor camps, people were punished or killed for mentioning the past. A memory could be a crime. Speaking of life before the revolution was considered treason. The Khmer Rouge believed that by removing time, they could remove identity. And for a while, it worked. Millions were displaced. Families were separated. Entire generations grew up without birthdays, without schools, without calendars. It's estimated that nearly 2 million people died between 1975 and 1979 through starvation, forced labor, torture, and execution. In 4 years, Cambodia lost not just lives, but its temporal anchor. When the regime finally fell in 1979, survivors faced a new kind of trauma. They didn't just have to rebuild homes and cities. They had to rebuild their place in time. What year was it? What age were they? When exactly had their children been born? Time, once taken for granted, had become fragmented. Personal timelines no longer aligned with the world's. Here lies the paradox. Time is considered the most constant, objective force in the universe. But in Cambodia, a single regime managed to abolish it with ideology, not by breaking physics, but by breaking memory. They made time illegal, and it disappeared, but time didn't stay silent. In the decades since, survivors have tried to piece it back together. Oral histories, memorials, reconstructed dates. But something always lingers in that empty space where a clock once ticked. A void where memory and history were supposed to live. And perhaps the most haunting part is this. The Khmer Rouge believed that by restarting time, they could restart human nature. That suffering, identity, and resistance were products of the past, and by erasing it, they could erase pain itself. But pain, like time, finds its way back. So as you drift to sleep tonight, imagine waking up in a world where nothing before today is allowed to exist. No memories, no birthdays, no clocks on the wall, only the eternal present, defined by someone else. Some revolutions change governments, others try to delete the timeline entirely. Maps are supposed to reflect the known world. They show us where we are, where we've been, and where we might go. But what if a map shows places that shouldn't be known? Continents uncharted, coastlines unmapped, lands untouched for thousands of years. This is the paradox of the Piri Reis Map, a 500-year-old document that seems to chart the impossible. Drawn in 1513 by Ottoman admiral and cartographer Piri Reis, the map was compiled using older sources, some ancient, some now lost. Only 1/3 of the map survives today, but what remains is enough to bewilder scholars, historians, and geographers alike. At first glance, it shows the western coasts of Europe and North Africa with impressive accuracy for the time. But as your eye moves further south, something extraordinary happens. The map depicts the eastern coast of South America with surprising precision. Even more astonishing, it appears to show a portion of Antarctica, centuries before it was officially discovered. And not just Antarctica as we see it today, buried under ice, but Antarctica without ice, as if the map were drawn when the continent's landmass was still exposed. According to geologists, Antarctica hasn't been ice-free for thousands of years, long before humans were thought to have the ability to map it. So how could a 16th century admiral, working with medieval tools and charts, depict such a land? Piri Reis himself wrote in the margin of the map that he used older charts and sea maps, some dating back to the time of Alexander the Great. These sources, he claimed, were reliable, but none of them survive. Whatever maps he referenced have been lost, or perhaps suppressed. Modern cartographers who have analyzed the Piri Reis map confirm that certain geographical features match modern satellite imaging, specifically the subglacial topography of Antarctica's Queen Maud Land. This data wasn't available until the 20th century, and yet it appears on a map from 1513. Some explain it away as coincidence. Others say the coastline was misinterpreted. Perhaps it's just an exaggerated southern stretch of South America. But the shapes are too distinct, the angles too precise. And if it were simply a mistake, why does it match modern reconstruction so well? The paradox deepens. How could knowledge of Antarctica, or even its coastline, exist in a pre-modern world? Was there an ancient civilization capable of global navigation? One that created advanced maps long before known history allows? If so, what happened to them, and to the records they left behind? Or is it possible that the ancients knew more than we give them credit for? That oral traditions and fragmented scrolls carried whispers of forgotten lands? That the past isn't as linear or as blind as we often assume? There's another layer to the mystery. Some researchers have pointed out that the Piri Reis map uses a projection method consistent with aerial surveying, something not understood until centuries later. Could it be that the original charts were made from an elevated perspective? If so, how? Ancient astronauts? Lost technology? Or just human ingenuity far ahead of its time? None of these answers satisfy, because none can fully explain how a man in 1513 held a map in his hands that seems to know things his world did not. Here lies the paradox. The map exists. It's real. It's been studied, tested, and preserved. But the knowledge it contains shouldn't exist. It's a record of somewhere that shouldn't have been seen, and yet, somehow, was. So as you drift into stillness tonight, imagine the old parchment spread out on a table, inked with mystery. A map that remembers a world no longer visible, a truth drawn in plain sight, but belonging to a time we've long forgotten. Because sometimes the most unbelievable part of history is that it was known all along. In the quiet solitude of a mountain monastery, surrounded by snow-covered peaks and thick forests, a manuscript was written that no one outside its stone walls was ever meant to see. It wasn't a book of spells or secrets, at least not in the traditional sense. But what it did contain, if the stories are true, was a prophecy, a warning, one that would later come to pass with eerie precision. This is the paradox of the Codex Obscura, the manuscript that predicted its own disappearance. The year was 1327. Europe was a continent of fractured kingdoms, spiritual anxiety, and whispers of heresy. In a Benedictine monastery high in the Alps, a group of monks devoted their lives to copying sacred texts, preserving knowledge from an era that felt increasingly unstable. Among their projects was a peculiar commission, a manuscript unlike any other, written not to preserve existing knowledge, but to warn of something still to come. The Codex Obscura, as it later came to be known, was filled with commentary on theology, apocalyptic visions, and illustrations of celestial alignments and cryptic symbols. But at the back of the manuscript, tucked into its final chapter, was a peculiar section that broke from the rest. In plain Latin, it warned that this book will be taken, not read, and that those who seek to own it shall forget what they were. At the time, no one outside the monastery even knew the codex existed. The monks kept it locked away, hidden from visitors and even from many within the order itself. It was too strange, they said, too unsettling. One chronicler wrote that the manuscript speaks not only of God, but of men in times not yet born. A strange comment, easily dismissed, until the book vanished. In the early 1600s, during the chaos of the 30 Years' War, mercenaries passed through the region. The monastery was briefly seized, and while little damage was done, one thing disappeared: the Codex Obscura. The area monks noticed immediately. But by then, their community had changed. Fewer spoke Latin. Fewer still remembered the original warnings. A few still believed the theft was not a theft, but a fulfillment. Soon after, the monastery fell into decline, fires, illness, internal conflict. By the end of the century, the building was abandoned. The surviving monks dispersed, and the codex was presumed lost. And yet, no trace of it has ever been found. It never appeared in auction houses or rare book collections. No references to its surface in private libraries. Not a single page, not a single copy. As if the book had been taken not just from the monastery, but from time itself. Here's where the paradox deepens. In the 1800s, a traveler named Jacob Stern visited the ruins of the old monastery and spoke with local villagers. One, an elderly woman, claimed her grandfather had seen the book, not just once, but twice. Once before it was stolen, and once after, in a dream. In the dream, the codex was open, its pages blank, save for one new line written in glowing ink. Only what is not remembered cannot be stolen. No record of this line appears in the original descriptions. If it was added later, who wrote it? And where is the manuscript now? Some believe it was taken by a secret society. Others, that it was burned. But there are more unusual theories that the Codex Obscura was never meant to be a physical object, but a conceptual one, a book that exists only when forgotten, that its purpose was to erase itself, and in doing so, protect the knowledge it held from those who would misuse it. Can a manuscript know it will vanish? Can ink carry intention? More importantly, why would a book warn of its own theft unless it wanted to be stolen? That's the true paradox. Not just that the Codex predicted its own disappearance, but that its disappearance may have been its purpose all along. So as you close your eyes tonight, imagine shelves of books waiting to be opened, one among them glowing faintly. A book that knows you're looking for it. A book that has already seen you come and go, and is still waiting to be forgotten again. Some manuscripts are written to be read, others are written to disappear. On most maps, borders are clean, simple lines. They divide one country from another, firm, final, unquestioned. But in a quiet corner of Europe, tucked between the Netherlands and Belgium, there's a town that seems to laugh at the very concept of borders. This is the paradox of Baal, a single town that exists in two countries at once, yet belongs fully to neither. The town is split between Baarle-Nassau, Dutch, and Baarle-Hertog, Belgian. But this is no ordinary border dispute. The division isn't along a river or highway. Instead, it weaves through gardens, bedrooms, cafes, and sidewalks. In some houses, the kitchen is in one country and the living room in another. There are stores with two entrances, one Belgian, one Dutch. Even the floor tiles in certain buildings are marked with small metal crosses showing where the international line runs. And here's the truly strange part. It works. The origin of this chaotic arrangement dates back centuries. In the medieval period, feudal lords made deals, land swaps, and piecemeal treaties that eventually created a bizarre checkerboard of parcels within parcels. As time passed and modern nations emerged, these medieval land contracts remained legally binding. When Belgium declared independence from the Netherlands in the 1830s, the strange puzzle of Baal was simply carried forward, locked in place by tradition and law. So today, Baal consists of over 24 separate enclaves, some Belgian, some Dutch. Inside some Belgian enclaves are Dutch sub-enclaves, land within land within land, like a geographic Russian doll. Imagine standing on one side of a street in the Netherlands and stepping 5 meters into Belgium, then walking into a Dutch island inside Belgium, all without crossing a checkpoint or showing a passport. And yet, this isn't chaos. It's quiet, peaceful, civil. The two governments coordinate everything, from trash collection to electricity to schooling. Citizens pay taxes based on where their front door is located. If your front door opens on the Dutch side, you're Dutch. Move it a few meters, you might switch countries entirely. During the COVID-19 pandemic, when Belgium ordered shops to close but the Netherlands allowed them to stay open, businesses that straddled the border simply closed one side of the store, while keeping the other open. It would be easy to call this a charming quirk of history, but look deeper, and you find a deeper contradiction. Two countries sharing one space, governed by different rules, languages, and systems, but functioning as one town. In a world obsessed with divisions, walls, identities, flags, Baarle offers a gentle defiance. It exists in contradiction, but thrives in cooperation. The people don't simply tolerate the absurdity, they embrace it. Their maps don't hide the borders, they celebrate them. And here lies the paradox. A place defined by division that has no conflict. No one wins, no one loses. There is no talk of reunification, no demand for clarity. Just coexistence within a puzzle that no one bothers to solve. But there's a more haunting thought too. If borders can become this meaningless, If nations can overlap without friction, what does that say about the entire idea of borders to begin with? Are they real, or are they stories we tell, lines we agree to follow until someone decides not to? What makes a country? Is it land, law, language, or is it something we've all agreed to pretend is absolute? Bali exists as living, proof that borders are not always what we think they are, that even in the most rigid systems, cracks can form. And within those cracks, something new, something peaceful, even absurd, can take root. So tonight, as your thoughts drift across imagined lines and ancient treaties, picture a street where every step takes you between nations, a place where contradiction isn't a problem, it's a way of life. Some cities are divided by war. This one is divided by maps and unified by forgetting to care. History is often treated as something finished, written, sealed, settled. But as you've now seen across these 22 forgotten paradoxes, the past is rarely that obedient. It slips, folds, contradicts, and resists clarity. Cities vanish, battles rewrite time. Empires disappear without a trace. Languages survive against all odds. And sometimes, a map or a manuscript dares to remember something we were told to forget. These stories weren't just about lost facts. They were about the fragility of truth itself, about how memory is shaped not just by what's preserved, but by what's erased, about how even a border can blur, even time can be silenced, even a war can last centuries without a single shot fired. So as your eyes grow heavy, let these quiet echoes of forgotten time remind you, the past is not dead. It's hiding, in plain sight, between cracks in the record, in cities split by invisible lines and manuscripts that vanish on cue. And if the past can be lost, it can also be found again, often in the most unexpected places. Sleep deeply. You've just wandered through the parts of history no one ever meant for you to remember. If this journey into hidden history stirred something in you, subscribe to The Present Path. Leave a comment with the paradox that stayed with you and the one you think history is still hiding. Until next time, keep wandering.